Okay, so first a little bit about me. I think there's probably a bio about me somewhere, which I submitted way late, so it may just only be digital. My name is ARL de Vries. Yes, weird name, it's Dutch. I'm with Elsevier, probably explains the Dutchness. And I've been with the company for about 10 years, and I've always been in product and in technology, so this is kind of my thing. I like this stuff a lot. Anyway, I didn't put my email address on the slides, but I did leave a stack of very old-fashioned business cards on the corner of the desk there, so if you would like to get in touch with me at some point, feel free to just hobble over there and grab one. Okay, so I will be talking about, I guess, less about APIs than it is about why you need to have them. You know, it's not about APIs, and that is what my presentation will be structured around. You know, it's about strategy, it's about your customers, and about business processes. Right? Those are the things really that matter. And APIs, as already alluded to, are a tool. You know, and it's important to recognize when an API makes sense, and I will be speaking about that a little bit. And then I will show one way of going about building, managing, deploying APIs, which is the way we did it. And just because we did it that way, it doesn't mean that it's the right way for you. You know, this is just a function of where we are. Now, first of all, so much buzz about APIs. APIs are a marketing thing. There's the API economy. There are being summits about it. So much just seems to be taking APIs as a starting point for stuff, you know, for a business model, for a strategy. And to the extent that I believe, you know, APIs are a marketing thing, it's certainly a marketing thing for the companies that organize these types of events, right? You know, they're just basically, you know, riding the hype, if you will, to some degree, which is fair enough. That's what a lot of these types of companies, like Programmable Web and others, do. They discover and discuss hypes. And I think also a very telltale sign that APIs have become a meme is because there's increasing amount of humor about it. Cartoons. There's like this. It's not from this series, but there's also a cartoon series specifically about developers, and pretty much 1 out of every 2 cartoons is about APIs and how, you know, funny they are, which is great. But ultimately, I don't think that APIs are such a thing in and of themselves. And this is a very important thing to read, because also this comes from Daniel Jacobson, who is the API guy at Netflix. And Netflix a couple of years ago was one of the poster childs of being a big media company that has a successful API program. They killed it. They're not running an API program anymore, or maybe I should say developer program, which to some degree is synonymous. But they stopped running that API program because it didn't serve a purpose for them anymore. As Netflix was building a market, they needed to get onto devices. They needed to partner with developers that built software and applications around their content that would get them onto devices. But at some point, as the platform market consolidated around iOS, about Android, you know, web standards developed, and Netflix became embedded into devices and televisions, there was no need anymore for them to work with developers to create that market penetration. You know, who doesn't have a Netflix prescription or a subscription right now? Probably, if you don't, you're in a country that isn't, where Netflix isn't available yet. So this is a very good example of how APIs in and of themselves are not a strategy. Maybe in some cases APIs or a developer program can be a very specific opportunity in themselves, can even be for a company pivotal for the success. But by and large, you know, you're probably going to be focusing on other things. Probably your company is going to be about something different. And I do think that when you're looking at publishing and even at information provision, you're not about APIs, you're about content and about data, right? So you need to keep an eye on what is the broader business objective of your organization, and really only look at APIs as a potential thing in your toolkit, a tactic that you can use to meet those objectives. Now, what does it mean for Elsevier? I mean, in all fairness, this is the first time in a long time that I went to look at this mission statement myself. Because maybe to some degree it doesn't really change. Well, it does change over time. You know, that's the thing about strategy. You need to continuously refresh it and update it. And I did go to the statement, and it had been changed since the last time that I saw it. And I've underlined a couple of things that are really very important. You know, strategy with the big S is about what is the unique position that you try to be in. You know, that, you know, sustainable competitive advantage. You know, and for Elsevier, kind of, you know, stated in an abstract way, is that we want to be uniquely positioned to show our customers the art of the possible. And the way we do it, which is strategy with a small s, if you will, is that we want to build highly effective solutions that anticipate the new ways in which customers will want to use information in the future, right? So everything that we do and all the decisions that we make around technology, about tools and applications, needs to be aligned with this. And maybe that is the kind of the key theme of my presentation. It's all about alignment. Now, Porter, I mean, this uniquely positioned, you know, unique position of competitive advantage comes from Michael Porter. Just to revolve on that a little bit more, this is the digital value chain. And I think if you're looking at how APIs are being talked about and the hype around it, it's very much focused on this. Oh, I actually should go further because you know that I screwed up the animation. It's very much about, traditionally, in the conversation about this interface between the organization and its customers. So it's about outbound logistics, you know, delivering information. It's got a marketing and sales component. You know, whenever people talk about the business model for APIs, that's what they're talking about, right? But that is really just one part of what one potential place in which APIs can play a role for an organization. You know, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do on the inbound side of your supply chain. There is, you know, in your procurement, in your operations, there's a lot of things that you can do with APIs. Everywhere where data is exchanged, information exchanged, there may be something for you to look at. Now, and this is an example of how at Elsevier we do stuff with APIs. It's got nothing, well, it's got everything to do with the customer ultimately, but it's not necessarily primarily focused at customers. You know, this is what we call, this is our production pipeline, basically. And you can see that there are things in there that are called APIs, but there's just a lot of information flow happening. There's a lot of stuff happening with content, right? And a lot of stuff happening with data, with partners, with suppliers, with people that write content, you know, and you really need to take a look at these business processes, identify how we can improve them, and then start thinking about how APIs can help. And this is a very good example of how, in our case, this has come together in what we call a virtual total warehouse, which we have a huge number of legacy systems. I was in the earlier session in the same room today where it was, you know, we talked about technology and technology choices and how there's a lot of tech debt. Same with us, with Elsevier. I mean, a huge organization, long-standing history of digital publishing. We have so many systems. But one thing that we're doing, actually, with our APIs is create a virtual unified layer that, to some degree, protects people from that, you know, hides that complexity and that heterogeneity from the people that interact with our data. Just one virtual API layer. And this is a good example of how that is split down in a very methodic way. So the way to think about APIs really, I'm not sure, who has ever seen this picture? Yeah, take a look at this. This is one of the most powerful ways of thinking about your business. It's relatively new. It's taught in business schools. Somebody showed it to me a couple of months ago, and light bulbs went off. And the way to think about APIs and a lot of the other assets that you have is that they're resources. That's where they sit. So that's also why APIs are not a business model. APIs can be a part of a business model that that provide value to customers. So again, forget about the hype. Yes, APIs are important, but they are not at the basis of a business model. They are not a strategy in and of themselves. Anyway, I'll now go into how APIs are important for us and why they are important to us. And this goes back to our strategy, right? This strategy of creating highly effective solutions. We know that Scopus is a very good example. It's an abstracting database with very heavily curated citation metadata. We know that that data is of high quality. That's what we're going for. We know that customers like it and that they would love to get their hands on that data to do other things with, and we are fine with that because it creates stickiness for the Scopus product and it increases the utility for our customers. And as a result, we're already seeing that about 50% of the Scopus customers are using our APIs currently. And interestingly, it's not just Scopus customers, there's also non-customers. We provide some of this data for free, and we actually see that people are using that data in their applications within the limitations of what they can do with the free layer of the API as well. And it's helping our brand awareness and drives a bit more traffic to our sites and so on, which is kind of a secondary effect, but the primary effect really is to enhance the value of that solution to the customers that have it. And we very much take a use case driven approach into everything what we do. So these are the things that we know customers want to do. So even if you're not thinking about APIs, it's just important that you know what it is that customers want to do with your data, with your product. And we've identified a number of standard use cases. And in developing our APIs, in our policy setting, in our support model, in our documentation, everything is driven by these use cases. So that as a customer that wants to do federated search, there's a clear path that you can follow from wanting to do it to actually having an implementation up and running. We do a similar thing for Science Direct, also use cases. And this is, interestingly, this is probably, you may have been aware of some discussions and reactions in the market about our recently announced sharing and hosting policies. But interestingly, actually, APIs play an important role into that as well. One of the key things that we want to do with regard to our policies of using content outside the platform is actually provide tools and technology that make it easier for people to do what they want to do with the content while still adhering to a policy. Right? And a very good example of that is here, it's not necessarily directly related to sharing, but for instance here in Google, one of the challenges that we know people have is that they identify Google identifies so many copies of the same article essentially. This is probably the most read article on Science Direct, Hallmarks of Cancer. You click on that link with 70 versions in Google, and you go to the page that shows all those versions, right? Now, you can replace Google with any other tool that indexes data or indexes articles. How does that tool know where the authoritative version of that article sits? How does the tool know whether it can link to maybe a repository-based copy of that same article, author-accepted manuscript? What is the user entitled to? Does the user that is using my tool right now actually have access to the formerly published article on Science Direct? APIs can provide that information to partners to give that smart, present that smart behavior to users. So even maybe if it's not entirely apparent, APIs are also very important for those very, strategic, if you will, and relatively sensitive business issues that we face. So now to talk about how do you identify the opportunity for an API? I wouldn't necessarily call it an opportunity as it is an imperative. They just make sense in certain cases. So all these use cases that I mentioned, what do they have in common? Well, it's about programmatic access. There's a piece of software that's interacting with that content or with the data. It's not a human user. It's very often about doing something different than what it is that you provide yourself through your own website, through your own publishing platform, or outside of your own product. And very often it's also about skill. You know, it is about doing something, using the data different. You know, it comes to some degree, it comes with using content in a different way. Very often it also means that you want to use it as a skill, that we don't usually do stuff with content at ourselves. So what you're looking for are solutions that are, provide machine-readable data that allow all these kinds of different operations and manipulations of the data, and also that is scale efficiently. And APIs do this better than websites. Websites are really, in a way, very constricted beings. They are designed for users, and because they are designed for human users, they are very skewed in terms of how the data is being represented. APIs are much more agnostic that way. But there's also a buzz factor, obviously, to APIs. And the reason why I put the little b up there is APIs, it's a marketing thing. We actually started with our first API, publicly promoted API, as a marketing thing. It was a cool thing to have a JavaScript API. But we then found out that people actually started using the API to meet real needs, to solve real problems, that came from real use cases. And that put us in a tough spot, because with that came the expectation of service, uptime, documentation, all those things. And that's why just going with an API program because everybody's doing it, or because it's cool to have, it's tricky, because you're giving a very versatile service to people to do something with. You may end up putting yourself in situations that you're not equipped to handle. So that is a big lesson that we learned. And this is a good example of where this has put us. I've removed the absolute numbers for, I hope, obvious reasons, but if you look at Scopus as a product, how it is being used, and how the API traffic to the same data has grown, the use of our data through APIs, so through other channels than just Scopus.com, is growing way faster. It's really on the trajectory to be a completely different order of magnitude. To some degree, these are apples and oranges. An API request is not the same thing as a page view on a website. But I would even argue that probably in a website, there's to some degree some inflation. There's people clicking on links and maybe not going about their stuff very efficiently, whereas when it comes to APIs, it's always a very specific choice to use an API call. So the real growth difference may actually be bigger. And this is what we're looking at, and it's still going up. And to some degree, this surprised us as well. Now, a little bit about how to do an API program. So we have a lot of different products, right? We have ScienceRect, we have Scopus, we have products like Reaxys, which is a chemistry database, and the scroll wheel that I'm showing shows probably about 24 other products as well. And do we have an API for all of them? Not for all of them, for some of them. And the way we've decided, in our case, to give access to those APIs is increasingly through one single destination. Because what we found out is that developers don't necessarily know about products. They don't know about journals. They don't know about subscriptions. They just want a place to go to. They go to Google, type in Elsevier API. Where do they go? Here. And you don't want to have them pick in Google, go through 5 results to find the right destination. So we've decided to come to bring all of our external API activities into one portal. And what we've also found out is that it's incredibly important to provide really good documentation and online support. Developers just want to figure out by themselves, mostly. And that is very interesting because we've now learned to cater not only to users, readers of articles, and authors who submit articles, and librarians who buy subscriptions, but also how to cater to developers, which is a completely other demographic. And the person who runs our API program, or who runs the program for me, she's a developer herself, so she knows what this stuff needs to look like. It's incredibly helpful. Now, I'm showing this because it's a nice thing. You can actually just go to our developer portal and play around with our APIs yourself. Just dev.elsevier.com, and you can explore the APIs. And there's a little, nice web interface that allows you to actually submit pieces of data and see what you get back. We found that is also very important for people to be able to get access to the APIs in a very easy way. Now, I also wanted to show that our architecture, in a nutshell, because what you see, that one destination where people can go to get access, it maps to what we call an external API layer that is unified and that works the same for all interfaces, but really underneath there is still this hodgepodge of all these different systems, right? Of all these legacy systems. We have journals, we have books, we have ANI databases, we have chemistry, search, all those things that are very subject specific. We have geographical databases where you can do stuff, search with coordinates and so on. And they're all driven by their own technologies to a large extent. So that is a challenge. How do you expose that externally? Well, we've decided to do that through this unified API layer that maps to, that you can get access to through this unified developer portal that I just showed you the description of. But from an organizational standpoint, that means that there's just this huge number of stakeholders internally that basically, we need to go to as the API team to talk about what they want, how their customers may be using the APIs, maybe also to build APIs that are not customer-facing but are partner-facing more and more. We're doing more and more of that as well. So, and that is the reason why I wanted to show this slide is because there is definitely a technology element to APIs, a technology strategy element to APIs. So no, APIs are not a strategy, but the APIs, they are not a business strategy, but they are a technology strategy. And building APIs and building them well and in a way that actually supports the business strategy really is a challenge. You need to have people who understand this stuff really well and who can look for opportunities to consolidate, to create efficiencies and leverage what you have without having to reinvent the wheel. So a lot of the challenges that we've had over the last couple of years were related to that. So key takeaways. Again, APIs are not a strategy. They're not a business model. They can be assets in a business model, and they do need to support use cases. Things that matter to your customers. You can also use them somewhere else in your value chain, or whatever you want to call it, where they support business processes. They're tools that you can use. And the ways to think about them, the way to recognize the opportunity for using them is, whenever you need to exchange data and content in a programmatic and flexible and scalable manner, APIs are probably a good way of doing it. And that may lead you to the decision to deploy APIs. And if you do so, then don't just copy what we've done or what other people have done, but do that in a way that is aligned with your business strategy, and with your technology strategy, and also with your organization strategy, which are 3 different angles. So, and that's it. Thank you.